it's not a matter of who sees or not sees. Even the Prophet ﷺ himself, I mean, he doesn't know of any transport medium that can transport him from one place to the other in the sky. No, it's just an illusory resemblance to tell you that this is not like your ordinary horse or a camel.
When you say the people, because it wasn't people.
No, anyone who sees that.
I had a question pertaining to one of your analogies you made when I can't remember his name. Kane? The other guy was here with us when he talked about the flying horse and all that. You made an analogy about an airplane, and I was just wondering if you meant to make that analogy, or if that's not a good analogy that you were trying to use in that instance.
No, I made an analogy.
Well, you stand by that analogy?
I mean, do you find the analogy not sensible enough to understand people's perception of transport mediums back in the old days?
Yes. In that instance, pertaining to what Islam says happened, and as far as the belief of that being what Islam says happened, I find that a little contradictory.
Tell me, what's your issues here?
Well, I remember you pointing to an airplane and kind of relating it back to if we were in the 6th or 7th century, if we saw that, what we would say it is. But that would mean that we saw a man-made object in the sky and prescribed it to something.
How would they know it was man-made?
No, that's why I say in the analogy that you made. That's why I was wondering if that's the analogy you wanted to use.
No, I'm using an analogy in which you have a flying object which is far beyond their comprehension of the time.
Right.
They could not comprehend you can actually fly in the sky like that, because they don't have the means or the technology developed enough to appreciate this kind of facilities for human beings to travel from one place to the other. So when you have, in 1400 years ago, a transport medium that takes you from one place to another, across heavens, it is beyond people's grasp at that time. How can that even be?
Okay, when you say people
at that time.
So that's inferring that all the people saw that event happen.
You see, it's not a matter of who sees or not sees. Even the Prophet ﷺ himself, I mean, he doesn't know of any transport medium that can transport him from one place to the other in the sky. Okay? There were no aeroplanes or hot air balloons and spaceships and so on and so forth. So when he was in this particular transport medium, Buraq, that transferred him, he knew this is a transport medium that Allah has provided for transportation of him from this ground to elsewhere, which the ordinary transport medium that they had at their disposal, camel or a horse, would not be sufficient for that purpose.
Right, but the reference, the analogy that you're making, as if more than just Muhammad saw that happen. So I'm saying,
well, you point it, we say, even if anyone saw it, that's irrelevant. The question is, people question because it's described, it's like for example, say whether it's described like a horse or something like this. If you look at the description and people think, how can you have a horse, a flying horse or something, right? We have to first go to the actual hadith in terms of the narration, what it says. Just because you have some resemblance to a particular animal of some kind, and people think it must be that. What I'm saying is, no, it's just an illusory resemblance to tell you that this is not like your ordinary horse or a camel.
Okay.
That's all.
So back to the actual analogy that you used, though, that's what kind of threw me off. And I wanted to ask why I was still really fresh, because that analogy infers that more than just Muhammad said that other people saw that happen. And I didn't know. I wasn't sure if that was part of the Hadith Analogy.
No, I'm not talking about people's visions. I'm saying people's understanding of a transport medium called Buraq. Quite interestingly, the Buraq, if you have a look at the root word, it's from Barak. It's like a thunder and lightning, right? So even there's some kind of hint there. I mean, this is not an ordinary transport medium. It's compared to some sort of like a lightning, like a flash, which when we think about like the fastest thing that you can think about now is light. And now this is talking about like it's something like this. I mean, from a root word.
We're not talking about warp drive kind of thing.
Like talking
Bending
about
the
what?
space. Warp drives.
Oh, like okay.
So they has that technique.
So
God,
my only, analogy was meant for people to understand and appreciate that you have to look at how at that time people would understand by certain words and terms. You cannot just use a term like they say like spaceship. What is a spaceship? It's a term like we understand now what a spaceship means, right? I mean, okay, this is not a technical term, it's like a general term. If I said a rocket, imagine you didn't know the English word rocket. What would you know what a rocket is? Is that a banana? Some kind of banana that you eat? Exactly. So technical jargons would not be understood by people.
Okay.
But if the descriptor in the narratives of the hadith tells you that this is what it is how the Prophet, he rode or embarked on this and it transported him from here to there, that's how it goes. I don't need to justify by saying actually it's got some kind of mechanical engine and so on. I'm just simply going to say it's a transport medium. Okay? That's all.
I guess what threw me off was using the analogy of the plane in reference to Muhammad saying that that's how it happened. We all can look and see the plane, but nobody else looked and saw what is it called? Barak. Nobody else saw that.
People don't have to see it because the issue is the transport medium is provided for the Prophet to go from this destination above the seven heavens and bring some message from the creator of the heaven and the earth. And as he passed through from Mecca to Jerusalem in Bayt al-Maqdis, he could describe what he saw to the people who actually been to Bayt al-Maqdis, to Jerusalem, because they knew that this man, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, has never been to Jerusalem. Okay, they knew that because he was with them all the time. It's like, imagine a small community and you see the people every day almost, right? So to go to Jerusalem, you'd be absent for about 3 months, for example, because that's how long it will take from going there, right? So he wasn't, in their eyes, someone that he disappeared suddenly and then he came back and so on. So as he then described the actual Bayt al-Maqdis, some people say it's the Temple of Solomon, others say it's the Holy Sepulchre, or whatever that structure is, with the doors and windows, because Allah then showed him visually at the time when they were asking, and they could relate to it. Exactly, this is how it is. And as he saw a caravan passing by on his way back to Mecca, he was describing them, and these people came later on, and he would describe exactly how he witnessed them. So the people, even though they haven't witnessed him traveling, but they could relate to what he has seen and what he relates to, that yes, he's describing what is exactly what, as if someone has been there. Okay.
As if somebody else had been.
No, as if he's been there.
Yeah, just the analogy kind of threw me off. I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah, sometimes we analogy for people to let people think like, don't be focused on and concentrate too much on the word like a burak. It's like an animal, a ride. And people say, how can an animal travel faster than light? It's
I'm not even saying that.
That was the analogy for like, when people see like a bird, but it's actually not a bird. My analogy is to say the people who would have seen that, they would say it's a bird. It's a big bird. It's a massive bird. They wouldn't say like, oh, it's a man-made object.
I guess my issue with it is when you say the people, because it wasn't people.
No, anyone who sees that, anyone at 5th, 7th century, if they see some flying object like a plane, they wouldn't see and say, it looks like a plane. They would say, what kind of bird is that? Flies in the air. Yeah?
I understand that.
Yeah. So if somebody to say, look, I flew in a bird from London to Moscow in this number of hours, at that time people will say, oh, how could you? And they describe everything. And then people realize, okay, this is not a bird, it's a special kind of bird. It's a transport medium that travels from one place to the other. So that is what I'm saying. I'm not...
So the people came to that conclusion.
Look, what I'm asking people to consider is only if they have an issue with the Burak. Many people have issue with how can an animal transfer and transport. That is the response. You might perceive it's an animal, but it is not necessarily not an animal. It's just a vehicle of transport.
So much
Does that make sense?
it makes sense
Right.
in the way you're saying it, but that wasn't my issue with it. My issue was the whole of the analogy being, if we looked and saw that airplane as if we were in the 7th century, we would think we could come up with that being a rock.
No, you would say it's a bird.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying.
or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not. But it's not. The fact of the matter is, it's not a bird.
Right.
Looks
right.
like a bird, flies like a bird, but it's not.
Right. But, and then my second issue was the way you said people. Because, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about Islam and all that, but I know it wasn't, that instance was just what Muhammad said. It wasn't what anybody else saw.
Yeah.
Could witness.
So there are instances where people have seen and witnessed miracles. His miracles, they have seen and witnessed. So when we talk about miracles themselves, I cannot transport you back in time there to make you see this is what it is. But I can provide you something that you can see it today.
Like what?
A perpetual miracle. If I show a perpetual, a miracle that is active today and it will be active later, and active until the end of the world. A miracle that will be miracle to everyone at their disposal to assess and understand and to be amazed about. Because if I were to say Moses alayhi salam parted the Red Sea, I can't take you there and say this is how he parted it, because these localized at the time bound event were sufficient evidence for the people at that time, for them, and evidence against them that this, if you don't believe now what you see that he's a prophet performing these acts which you know defies your natural understanding of physical laws, so he must be what he claims to be, a prophet of God, performing this with the power of God and the permission of God, all these things for you to accept him as a prophet and a messenger, because that's his evidence. So Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam likewise has brought evidence that is perpetual miracle at all times, which you can have access to today.
Verify it. That's
Like what?
That's Quran. You can verify Quran.
The Quran?
Yes. So
What do you mean
it's
verify?
an So, brother, you can tell that
No,
the
go
claim, the claim Quran, about the claim that no one can reproduce the Quran with its linguistic structure
I had
predictions.
This discussion with can't remember his name now. Abbas, I think maybe. Abbas.
Okay,
A couple of weeks ago. Yeah. And he explained that the Quran didn't come down the way it is compiled today. It came down in different, like the last verse could have been the first verse in different ways. Is that a miracle?
That's not what the miracle is.
So the miracle was that even if in a random way it has come, after the final compilation with the instruction of the angel Gabriel, the final copy you have now, you can see the mathematical structures.
The what?
Mathematical structures there in the, you can say that there people see that like in a particular surah you have the number of letters, you have number of the chromosome number. You can relate to this kind of thing, like very miraculous. After you have certain knowledge, then you can verify that, you can appreciate that no one can, without any knowledge, this thing is cannot just come, like that thing.
So,
and another thing is that it can, the literary thing, and the Arabic people can more appreciate that. But even if there is an article, probably you have, has Abbas referred that to you, that article, bring a surah like that, there is challenge to the whole humanity that no one can reproduce a single chapter like Quran. So,
Two points on that. One was what I mentioned to Abbas was, didn't Satan produce some series of the Quran and the later, I guess, removed? And
No.
no, there's no satanic verses there.
Of course not. That's the Christian polemic.
Okay. And also, if it's a miracle, can you explain a miracle? Can we today go and he just said you couldn't explain the miracle of Moses parting the sea, but you can explain the miracle of the Quran.
No, I didn't say you couldn't explain. What I said is this.
That you couldn't explain.
No, let me explain. When you have something like, say, I bring something which defies laws of physical nature as we understand it, you would have a problem explaining it. You will say, how does it go against natural laws? For example, if you float in air without any kind of anti-gravity devices, that would be something strange to explain.
Yes.
Yeah? So I'm talking about the Quranic composition. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. The composition of the Quran as a final product is such that you cannot imitate it. Any literature, any form of literature, whether they be prose or poetry, you can imitate it. You can compose something like it. But you cannot do so with the Quran in its linguistic structure and its stylistics. What's preventing people from doing that is the question, because naturally you should be able to imitate any linguistic constructs, any prose or poems and poetry, and say mine is similar to that. But when you try to imitate something like the Quran, you cannot do that, because within the stylistics, your composition would not make sense because of the stylistics, rhymes and meters and the structures that is within that particular objective framework. If you were to apply the same stylistics, you will be speaking gibberish. So you don't make any sense. You can't imitate it.
Couldn't you say that?
As eloquent, as meaningful as it is.
But couldn't you say that about any language?
No. I've just told you, you can imitate any language,
so
any composition.
The stories in the Quran that were retells of stories that happened before.
No, that's not what the challenge is. The challenge is to bring something like it, and when we look at it objectively, we can see the stylistic differences between the speech of the pre-Islamic poets in their poetry. We can see the speech of the Meccan pagans, Jews, Christians, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, even the speech of the Prophet ﷺ. There's a stylistic difference in the way the Quran is constructed. So once you want to imitate the same stylistics and you apply that stylistics with your own words, with your own vocabulary, the product that you get is something that becomes laughable, something that doesn't have meanings, something that becomes gibberish type things. Because this is how the Quranic structure is, that is only within the stylistics make that eloquent sense and meaning.
Okay.
And this is a hallmark as a divine signature of the Creator, saying, this is my speech, and you cannot imitate my speech. If God were to tell you this is the way I've constructed this particular speech, you cannot imitate it. I mean, how can human beings imitate anything like that? So when we look at it objectively and we see how the stylistics are, when I say stylistics, you see sometimes you can have a sentence that begins with a noun or a verb or a preposition and so on. This is what we're talking about, stylistics. The position of the verb and the prepositions and how things are constructed within that structure. Let alone the rhymes and meters. This is a secondary point. So this is something that is not possible for someone to imitate. So it may be difficult for people who haven't got a linguistic background to appreciate it, but people who were masters in the Arabic language back then, it was an evidence against them, and it continues to be evidence against those people who understands the Arabic language. And there are still people learning the same Quranic Arabic or the Fusha Arabic language at that time, and they appreciate how the Quran is unique in its linguistic literary compositions. So you can at any time go and find a scholar of Arabic language, a professor and a PhD holder, for example, who's not a Muslim, and you can ask for the help and support if you cannot do it yourself. Oh, can you help me imitate a chapter like this, for example? They were available. But what I'm saying is, people over the centuries, they have looked at it. Even before they started, some of them even given up. And those that did bring something, it became a laughing stock because people knew that that's not something that makes much sense. Like al-fil wal-fil, wama adraka mal-fil, lahu dhanbun wabil, wa khurtumun tawil. Something along this line. Oh, what do you say an elephant? An elephant has a tail and a long trunk and so on. I mean, how does that compare to the chapter that says al-qari'ah, mal-qari'ah, wama adraka mal-qari'ah, and gives is this meaning? What is this, thing that's going to come to you? The evident destructions at that time, what's going to happen, and so on. The beauty, the eloquence, the meaning, the depth, and so on, compared to someone saying an elephant with a long tail and a long trunk and so on. And even with this construct, a child will say, it's not even a kindergarten poetry or a poem. Yeah. So you cannot even compare anything like it. Even those things that were tried by people, and people are still trying today. There are people in the internet, you will go surah like it, and they try to say like, this is the surah like a champagne and things like this, or sabun in the COVID times, and you can see how they fell. They fell within the first few lines.
So I'm guessing when you're saying that, so any story that's the exact mirror of what was revealed in the Quran before the Quran, is that part of that miracle too?
You see, I don't know how much you understood. Do you want to just repeat and recap to me what is the objective nature of the challenge? I explained to you.
That nobody can produce a Quranic verse or surah like it.
In what way?
In what way? That's my whole point.
That's what I've explained.
So it's only pertaining to the Arabic language.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a given start. But what is the nature of this challenge? I explained to you for the last few minutes.
The nature of the challenge is that nobody has been able to do it before.
That's an assertion and a claim that we're making, that no one has been able to imitate it.
Right.
But what is the nature of the challenge?
When that nobody can imitate, wouldn't that be an imitation of what was said before, though?
So you perhaps missed it. It's not to do with like the stories of the old and comparing the stories and no one can imitate a story. I talked about stylistics.
Yep.
Yeah? If you were a scientist and I say this is an experiment that I've done, the way to disprove my experiment is this. So I gave you the methods and I'll tell you this is what you have to do. So you understand it's not about like, is it about, do I have to...
So
if there's no chemicals involved and I ignore all the chemicals and I just draw a diagram that was in the book because I say, here, I've done your challenge. I've missed out the whole point.
I guess the question I have is, how can it be a miracle if it was already, if a specific portion of it was revealed here? Is that not part of that same miracle? Because it's, no. But it's not.
So with all due respect, let me explain to you again. You missed it. Let me give you an analogy.
Okay.
See,
make sure it's a good one.
My analogy, if you disagree with it, you can tell me why it's not a good one. I explained to you my analogy that I used last week, and you understood and appreciated. You see those buildings there?
I didn't understand it because it didn't make sense. The analogy you used.
Does it make sense now?
About the plane?
Yeah?
No, absolutely not.
After all that explaining, it doesn't make sense.
Well, we moved on to a different topic.
No. So I don't think anything will make sense to you because something I explained to you that when I say people look at the plane now 500 years ago, they would not say it's a plane. They would say, look at this bird.
Yes, but...
And if I said something dropped from, like a parachute and people dropped, you would say, how did they drop from that flying bird, a big bird? They won't say it's a plane or a rocket or a spaceship.
I agree with that. The analogy that you're using, though, is you're referencing something man-made.
Nothing about man-made. I'm just saying to you, if I said, okay, people's perception will be that's a bird. They won't say it's a rocket or a spaceship or a plane.
When you say the people's perception.
Your perception.
Yeah.
If you were 500 years ago and 1,000 years ago, and you saw a plane going like this and parachute, people dropping from the plane, what would you say?
My perception
man-made
would be
object?
A bird. My perception would be it would be a
That's
bird.
Precisely my point. So you understand that.
But when you say people, me in particular, would you believe that it's a bird if I told you that's a bird?
No. If I said you can fly with this bird from one place to the other, from London to New York.
Right. Would you?
What would you say?
Accept that premise if I was to tell you that if we were 500 years ago, like you see that bird, we can get in that bird. I got in that bird and flew to Jerusalem and came back.
I would be amazed, and then I would want some evidence.
Okay.
And when I look at that, actually, you've been to New York and you've actually met someone because they came and say, 1 year ago, because it takes you 1 year to go to New York, for example, with boats and whatever. Yeah, he came and blah, 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 blah. I will say, yeah, there you go. You substantiated your claim. That's what I'm saying. When he went to Isra and Miraj, he substantiated his claim. He substantiated their claim to the people.
Right. You said
so people didn't have to see the bird.
Describing Jerusalem to them, and
do you know how long it took from people to... He traveled from Mecca to Jerusalem, to above the seven heavens, and came back in a part of a night.
That was another
From Mecca to Jerusalem, it takes months to travel. So when people were questioning this, and he demonstrated with evidence, then
what was that evidence again that he demonstrated? Wasn't it describing Jerusalem?
I gave you two pieces of evidence. Do you remember?
Seeing the caravan.
Yeah.
That to them was evidence that that happened.
Imagine you. You were the people at that time.
Yep.
Yeah. You have been to Jerusalem, and you know I've never been to Jerusalem. Okay. And you tell me, ask me about, okay, how about this? Is there a window there or something? I say, yep, there's two windows there. Now, you ask me specific something that I would not have learned and known from anyone else. Because you are asking for intricate, very, very fine details of this only you perhaps are privy to. And when you hear that I'm just telling you exactly from any question that you're giving me, I'm answering back, what would you think?
Well,
that I'm making things up? You would say?
Would be what was the intricate details that he gave to them?
It's on the hadith, it's on the narrations. It tells you exactly how they asked. It tells you about doors and windows and all these structures and so on. So that fine level of detail has convinced many people. Yep.
I accept that portion of that, but my issue was the reference to the airplane.
I just explained to you what this analogy is. I mean, if you don't understand, then I don't know how.
The context was that Cain, who read the book written by Dawkins, or kind of thing, who used to mock in Islam, citing this Burak kind of thing.
There are people who start questioning and critiquing Islam because, oh look, they believe in a flying horse that travels from one place to the other. Now, and my response is with an analogy. Of course, people would only understand. People will only understand and appreciate if the language is for them that is palatable. If it talked about a rocket, they wouldn't understand what it is. They wouldn't know what a rocket is.
My issue wasn't so much the belief.
Imagine you just spoke to Arab. He flew by a rocket.
My issue was the analogy in itself.
So the point was that
not the belief in
popular science communication. How do you represent some highly sophisticated scientific idea, kind of thing? You know. So Quran does not, impose us on believing that this horse kind of description. That was language of people, that was language of people. But the Quran specifically used the language, what Burak.
Burak is not in the Quran talking about this. Yes. These are the narrators of the hadith, for example. They're talking about how the mount, as the Prophet, explained.
Oh, that's not in the Quran. That story?
No, but it doesn't mean it's inauthentic because we have two sources of Islam: the Quran and authentic hadith. Okay, so when I talk about the building behind you, let's return to that subject. If I told you as an architect, you are an architect, right? You make buildings, tall skyscrapers, and so on and so forth. And I told you, here's my building. You can't make anything like it. You will say, why not? I'm a master architect in the regions. I can make any building that is known to man.
That would depend on who's judging the contest, wouldn't it not?
Let me give you the full analogy. So you would say, look, I'm known to be the master architect in the region. I mean, I can make anything that you is capable of within our understanding. So I say, okay, look at my building. You look at the building, and on close inspection, what you see is each brick, they're not touching each other with cement. They're floating in space. Okay. So you can actually put something there all around it. So that building, every brick is floating in space and not touching one another with kind of cementing. You, if I say bring something like it, can you make a building like this even today?
Is that the analogy you want to
I'm asking you, if you are an architect.
If I was an architect, can I make buildings that float?
No. You make buildings. You make buildings.
Float.
You make buildings like that. But I say my building is unimitable. You can't imitate something like my building.
Who's judging whether or not it's imitable?
Before we go to judging,
Well, that's the biggest part of the whole thing, right?
but it's very important for you to. Firstly, before you go to judges, let me ask yourself.
Okay.
So I present to you a building like this. Can you make it like that?
I don't know.
So you
I don't know if I could make that building.
seriously?
Seriously.
So you think you can?
It depends.
I just told you a building like that. Can you make it today?
Where the bricks are not touching each other.
Yeah, every single brick can float in space.
Logically, to me, that wouldn't be a building.
I'm just telling you it's a building, but it's not cemented.
But they were floating where you could pass a piece of paper through.
Look, you see how they're connected?
Yes.
I'm saying there's gap there you can just put your hand through and they're floating. There's no physical connectors like cementing between the bricks. That's the structure of my building. It's made of bricks, but the structure of my building. So the analogy I gave, Quran is in the Arabic language. It's structured with the Arabic alphabet, alif, ba, ta, tha, and so on. But the way the letters, the harf, are constructed in sentences, paragraphs, for example, in such a way, the final construct is something that you cannot imitate, just like you have a building made of bricks. That building is made of bricks or stones. Mine is likewise. But the way it's constructed is slightly different. It is, bricks are floating in space, not cemented or connected with each other. So if you are an architect, well-known architect that has made these buildings, I'm asking you this question objectively, not subjectively. If I now present to you my building like this, would you be able to make something like it?
No.
Precisely. So this is how.
Oh, hang on. I would not be able to make something like it according to who?
To you, can you make it?
I don't know. I don't know if that's...
Okay, we're going to end the discussion here?
That's not even like, I didn't know. No, that's what...
No. There's no point discussing any further.
All bricks are floating anyway because it's magnetism.
Yeah. That's right. You know what, Martin? It's when I see people are not sincere, this is where I leave.
What part of what I said was sincere?
Think about it and reflect. Okay, thank you. And nice talking to you. But I hope this is the end of the discussion for a long time until you change your particular inside, brother. What's this? Yeah, I know. Unless you see,
You can go.
unless you have an approach of sincerity, then we can't talk. I'm sorry.
You can read this.